There's a huge discussion on social media about digital church in Germany. You're looking at it from a broader international perspective. What is a digital church?
So this is something that I really had to think about in my research, because when I was starting off doing my academic research, we would talk about online and offline as two obvious concepts. And so I would talk about online church and then offline church. But then as soon as I started writing, I realized, well, there aren't any offline churches. Now, even if your church doesn't have a website, what if there's somebody in the congregation who is using social media? What if there's someone in the congregation who has internet access, but they're not using that to discuss Christianity? But they still have that access. And now more and more everybody has, or many people, shall we say, have got a smartphone in their pocket, which might be digitally connected all the way through the service. So every church is digital all the time. And the question is not what does it mean to be a digital church, but how do you use the digital dimension that your church has already got to further your mission in the community.
The internet is not location-based. You can access the internet from anywhere in the world. Does the internet change the church? For example, you have parishes all over Germany. There's no unchurched place. But if the church becomes digital, how does that relate to parish boundaries? Are parishes a structure of the church that is no longer viable in the 21st century?
So, the first change, and really this is true of any kind of media, right back to the printing press or the written manuscript before then, that through media people can choose whose voice they listen to. So the parish boundary is not a restriction on communication. And in a digital world, that is intensified. Now anybody can talk more or less to anybody. We can hear voices from anywhere. But at the same time, we live in locations. People maybe travel between locations a lot, perhaps they move around, but there are still located concerns and issues. And the parish still makes sense to me as a way of engaging with a particular neighbourhood. Certainly that the church needs to carry on thinking about where those neighbourhoods are, what communities do people move in, and how do we connect, or how does the church connect with those communities. But the internet itself doesn't make the parish obsolete, I don't think. There's, from a digital anthropology, from an academic perspective, there's been a lot of research showing that the internet actually is a different thing in different places. It's not the same everywhere in the world. Being digitally connected can mean different things to different people in different contexts and different locations. And there again, thinking just geographically about where you are and what people need and what they're talking about in that place is very meaningful today.
How does the church become digital? Is it a bottom-up development or a top-down development? Does the church become digital from the parish level and it grows, or does it become digital from the leadership level, from the national level, and it trickles down to the parishes?
So, something interesting happens with digital communications, which I don't think is true of older media revolutions, which is that at the grassroots level, everyone is connected already. The church is trying to catch up with a media revolution that's already happened. At the grassroots level, parishes are connected, whether or not they're using that connection to talk about church and theology and Christianity. The digital world has already arrived. If you're talking about television, it was not really the case that everybody had their own television channel, but now everyone has their own social media presence or their online presence. But at the same time, there is a role for the national church or larger organisations, which I would suggest is working out how to harness and encourage and train what's already happening at the grassroots level, and perhaps how to listen and learn from what's already going on in society.
What are the most important issues that need to be addressed for the church to become digital?
Oh, tricky. So there's an ongoing question, I think, about listening. What are the voices the church needs to listen to be engaged with the right questions in a digital context? So that could include listening to the conversations about Christianity and issues of faith or spirituality already going on in the world. It could include trying to build connections between churches and secular businesses and industries who are using digital well to see what can be learned. It should certainly include encouraging Christians to go into digital professions and to go into digital training. So there's an increasing generation of Christians who know how to build and design and think digitally. But there's also a need, I think, for digital theology. Get these people together, people who understand building the digital, people who have a voice online, together with theologians and church communicators to work out the future of Christian reflection on a digital world.
What is digital theology? At least we in the church think that theology should address issues that are discussed in society. What could be the church's contribution to the digital society?
So, digital theology, I think, can look in at least two different directions. You can use the theological resources of the Christian tradition to interrogate digital culture, to reflect on or evaluate or criticize or encourage what's going on in the world around us. But you can also look at the ways in which the digital is actually changing Christianity itself, changing Christian communication, Christian priorities, the way Christians are connected together in their communities. So there's a double conversation that each side can affect the other. So that's how I would see digital theology. It's those two conversations, and it's something that needs to happen in a group discussion, I think. You need to have digital experts, researchers, people who understand the digital world, and theologians engaged with Christian history, talking together to try and encourage better conversations.
Can anything become digital? For example, counseling or praying? Could you have a chatbot as a counselor, or would you argue that counseling, for example, is something that needs to be done face-to-face by humans?
I think that's not a question that we can ever answer in advance. The Christian church has always, maybe that's too broad, but there have often been Christian attempts to decide in advance what cannot be done online. We cannot have online churches, we cannot have online prayer, we cannot have online counselling. And mostly, I think, predictions like that have been left behind a little bit by the way the world has developed. There are online churches. There are many spaces of online prayer. If you talk to the people who engage in those spaces, they have positive things to say, they have criticisms to make, but we don't know what those are until they've happened. So the job of the church, I think, should not be declaring in advance that some things are impossible. It should be following along with the experiments of the world and seeing what develops, trying things out, and then reflecting on experience.
Does every church have to become digital? Because I sometimes feel that if I talk at a pastor's conference, there are some people who are very enthusiastic, and there are others who are very tired, and they say, not another thing we have to do.
So, if you're a pastor in a congregation, you need to think what your congregation needs. It's definitely not the case that every pastor needs to have a live stream in their church, or a Facebook account, or a Twitter account. Find out what your congregation could use and benefit from, and what the community around them might enjoy. We've mentioned already that communication happens internationally across boundaries. If the pastor in the next city has got a great blog, well, tell people to go read it. You don't have to have one as well. If there's a pastor in another country who has a wonderful video channel, or there's somebody who's not in the church at all but is doing really interesting campaigning for justice, send people there. But at the same time, I think your congregation, if you're a pastor, is almost certainly already digital, maybe in ways that you don't know about. If you have a congregation of older people, well, maybe they're using email or social media or some other means to, maybe they're using Skype to keep in touch with their families. Maybe they could be using those things more. Maybe they could be using those things to engage with government resources, perhaps. There are lots of possibilities. So if you as a pastor just think of the digital as a job that you don't want to do, you're going to miss out on what your congregation is already doing and how you could be part of that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.